Commissioner Finn.
Yeah, if we're if we're now going for full salary comparability, I think we have to reopen the question of the 12-month year. I just don't think very many taxpayers are going to want to offer the same pay for a 10-month year that other people are getting for a 12-month year. I think it is naive and la-la landish of us to think so. So are we going to make the job obligations of teachers equivalent to those of the professions where we are seeking salary comparability?
Okay, that's a very significant issue, so let's stay on that for a moment. Do we have, did you want to speak to that, Commissioner Showalter?
I was going to speak about something else, but I think that's a pretty broad subject that we haven't entertained. So if we want to go down that rabbit hole, I guess we could.
Commissioner Valentine.
To that point also, I think we're taking a dangerous path by tying teachers' salaries to other industries. There's no other industry that does that. You know, if the state wants to see teachers' salaries increase, which in a lot of areas I'm sure they need it, then let the state come up with that salary rate. Don't tie it to other industries, or every time the architects in Allegheny County give themselves a raise, then the teachers are going to be due a raise. And plus, whenever you look at these other industries, yes, their industries need a high level of education, but an architect has a lot of personal responsibility. His signature is on every blueprint that he draws, and if the building falls down, he'll never design another building. An engineer, if the bridge falls down, he'll never be an engineer again. You don't have that type of responsibility in the teaching industry. Yeah, and with the two bargaining units that are going to be bargaining for these wages, neither of them supply the funding. The state and the local government supply the funding, but in that last line there in C, it sort of looks like the state says, well, we will step in and set the funding if the local municipalities aren't, because they're going to keep monitoring it, and they'll come up with ways to see that people are matching those. So to me, I think we're taking a dangerous path by tying it to other industries. We ought to set the wages by the state and let the state pay those wages. And then, I really don't see how this is going to work with fluctuating wages in all those industries. It's something that's not done in any other industry. And I'm not sure what steps the state can take since they're not part of the bargaining and they only do some of the funding.
Well, yeah, I would disagree a little bit about other industries don't do this. Certainly in the university system of Maryland, professional staff salaries are benchmarked against staff working in other industries. I mean, that is how salaries are set. I can't speak to other areas, but certainly in higher education, this methodology is certainly used. Do others want to speak to Commissioner Valentine's point? Superintendent. Okay. Who's up? Well, let's see. Let's go as Superintendent Guthrie, and then we'll come to Commissioner.
Obviously, this is not an easy question to answer. I'm going to make it a little more complicated because there is also the fact that administrators get paid on a 12-month basis, and you've got to be aware of the relationship between administrators' pay and teachers' pay. In fact, in my county and counties across the state, because we use an experience-based pay scale on teachers, it is likely and possible and actual that we have administrators who work 12 months who make less on a daily rate than teachers. So you have to understand that relationship as well. And I don't have an answer, and I'm not attempting to answer. I think there's valid points on both sides, but you can't ignore that administrators are in this equation on a 12-month basis. And I don't know, I don't believe we've addressed administrator pay in any of this.
Commissioner Helfman.
I would suggest that the work group handled the 12-month issue.
Let's see. Chancellor Caret.
I agree. The work group should handle this. I think just a general caution as we get into the financial side of this. Very often work groups are trying to do all the great things that we're trying to do, and then the price tag becomes so big it dies under its own weight. So I do think we need to face financial reality as we prioritize these things, and a lot of these things we'd love to do and we may not be able to afford. And so we have to figure out where that balance is. And then in relationship to Commissioner Valentine, I agree. I do think we need appropriate data sets to benchmark against. I'm uncomfortable with the specificity of architect, nurses, et cetera, because I'm not sure they're the right data sets. I'd have to see the data. But I do think it should be, there is a certain amount of this that's market-driven, and we see that all the time, and it's regional as well as by specific category. And so I think it's important we don't just, again, pie in the sky say we're going to set it based at this level. It's got to be based on comparable data sets. At the same time, in this particular profession, we want to raise the standards and therefore raise the salaries, and hopefully the market will help us do that, but it's going to be an incremental thing.
I mean, I think the point here is that we want salaries set at a level that will attract more talented people to opt for teaching as a career. It appears that a lot of people don't go into teaching just because the compensation and conditions are not attractive. So if you don't have some comparability of salary, it seems to me that we, with other highly educated professions that require a lot of education, we will not be accomplishing our goal. Let me turn to Superintendent Salmon.
So I agree and disagree with a lot of what's been said. How's that for an entree into it? I don't know. Superintendents have talked for years about the 12-month teacher across the state of Maryland. This is not a new topic. We've talked about it because our teachers are engaged either in summer school or professional development, and I think it's time to talk about it. And I don't think it's something we should leave to a work group because from what the Chancellor just said, I think this is a philosophical discussion that this commission should resolve and direct the work group then to either cost out or adopt something that is palatable. I believe that we should move to 12-month teachers. I think that either through providing our summer programs and professional development, we could certainly move to that direction. But I also caution, as Superintendent Guthrie just did, we have lots of incidences where teachers hourly are making more than administrators. So all of that has to be in the figure. But I think it should be discussed here and resolved here.
Thank you. Commissioner Finn.
Well, let me second that and say that as some of you know, I'd be fine with a 12-month school year, too. I think that we have a ridiculously bobtailed school year for many children. But the reason it is not appropriate to leave this to the work group is that the work group is going to start its work after the preliminary report is in. The preliminary report is going to say what is in the draft in front of us. The draft in front of us suggests salary comparability for 10-month employees to a number of careers that are full-year careers. I'm not comfortable with that in the preliminary report. I think that this should be resolved now if we're going for salary comparability.
Senator Pinsky.
Yeah, these are two distinct questions, 12-month and salary. I think they're both important and we should address them. But I've been under the belief that for 12 months, when we've talked about improving salary and the profession, that's been a strong foundation, and that a lot of people are not going in education because it's not respected, and salary is part of that, planning time, how it's seen in society. And, I think we're at about a 20 or 25% gap between those careers. I think one was at 75 in the rural area, and teachers were at 50 or 53. It's about a 25% gap. and that's with the so-called summer off. But I think for those who've been in the classroom, when teachers who are distinct from other professions, and I'm going to use a secondary teacher myself, and there are other people around here, you've got to be on all day. You're in front of that class. You can't be sick. You can't be off your game because you lose the classroom. You're in an office. You can have a bad day. You can be in front of your computer and go a little easier. You can't as a teacher. You simply can't. And whether you talk about those 2 months being recoup time or whatever, a lot of people feel that 10-month is comparable to the 12-month career for other professionals. And I think all along, and I think Mark has said it pretty clearly, we're to get comparable based on a 10-month school year. I think that's clear. I think that's been clear all along. That's been an assumption I've worked on. That being said, should the school year be longer? I absolutely agree with Checker, but I also think that means increased salary. You know, right now, if a teacher works an 11th month, it's plus 10%. Or if they work 12 months, it's plus 20%. Because those 10 months are comparable to a 12-month for other careers because it's a whole different life. Grading papers at home, you never leave your job. And I would also disagree that the responsibility of having 30 young people in your classroom is comparable to signing off on plans, whether it's because of their instructional emotional growth or even their fears of what's happening at home, whether it be abuse or whatever, and you reporting or not reporting it. You're on the firing line in many, many ways. So, I think the language is correct. I also think we should have that discussion about extending the school year, but it's on top of this. So, I just think what's in this document is what we've been working on, the assumption we've been working on for 12 months, and diluting it, I think, would be a major mistake in terms of what we're trying to do of professionalizing the profession.
Delegate McIntosh.
Yeah, I'm going to ditto what Senator Pinsky just said and note that I feel very strongly about the fact that we need to look at after school and summer school times included in teachers' salaries, etc. And I will also just say, I'm not going to jump ahead, but building block 2, when we get there, it's absent a lot of discussion that we had about after school and summer school. But I agree with both Senator Pinsky and our secretary that we need to be looking at year-round school, whether that's 10 months spread out over 12 months in a different way, or whether that's adding summer school in as an additional time frame. Whatever, we need to be looking at that, in particular in our low-income areas where we have students with challenges. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Rice.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo the sentiments of the folks that you've heard recently who've spoke about this issue. I think it's incredibly critical when we talk about, and I've had the pleasure of doing a number of budget forums every single year for the past 2 years as I've been education chair in Montgomery County. And one of the number one complaints that I get from teachers who come to these budget meetings and testify is about the lack of ability to do those kinds of things that they want to do when it comes to professional development and others. And they also highlight the fact, and this is something that we talk about when we talk about growing our teachers to really support our children. Cultural competency, for example. We try and squeeze that into a 1 or 2 day program. When in reality, it's something that a person could actually take a course for a week or 2 weeks on. And so if we have things like this that are out there to where there now is a larger time frame, we make better teachers. And so those teachers are then more responsive to being able to address the needs that they're seeing in the classroom. When it comes to mental health and well-being of children and teaching them about identifying some of the key components that are there for children that need help or that are crying out for assistance, we again consolidate it to a one-day program, an online type of course, because there's no time. And so I think actually having a longer amount of time for teachers to be able to commit to making their craft even better is going to benefit not only the teachers themselves, but our classrooms and our systems. And I will just say that whether it's revolutionary, whether it's crazy, our superintendent has decided to pilot this at 2 of our elementary schools in Montgomery County and to extend the school year to see, and these are schools that are challenged, and see if adding that additional time frame is going to help these students. So this is happening now. And so I do agree that now is the time. Now is the time to go ahead and start having this real conversation about what it is that we're doing, because school systems in the state of Maryland are doing it right now.
Commissioner Finn?
Well, I think we may be heading for a divide on the preliminary report of the commission. I think it is naive in a state that is facing a structural deficit, as we learned at the last meeting, to go for salary comparability without dealing with any of the requisite trade-offs, without dealing with the length of the contract, without dealing with the issues of class size, without dealing with the 50% of employees who are not teachers. We are building a castle in the air, and it isn't going to ever reach the land.
Commissioner Schaefer?
So I want to address the elephant in the room, which is if we go down that road, you're getting into territory that local school systems negotiate with their employee associations. And then when you're talking about those negotiations, we're not just talking about teachers. We're talking about support staff, and we're talking about administrators, and we're basically, for us to go down that road, you're setting negotiation terms. I just want to be clear about that. And to Senator Pinsky's point, which I fully agree with, we're going to be wrestling with that concept, and there's not enough focus. We're not going to be able to turn enough focus to what we're really trying to do, which is to elevate the teaching profession. And I think that we're going to get bogged down in a lot of details that we are not going to be equipped to deal with.
I'm looking for a light of wisdom to turn on. Superintendent Guthrie.
I appreciate all the discussion. I think the fundamental basis of this committee is to increase teacher compensation. I don't, the comparative benchmarks are up in question, but to back off of that now and say it's not affordable, I think erodes all of the work that we've done. I think that very clearly it's been laid out, increasing the compensation, increasing the duties, increasing the responsibility, increasing the teacher prep, all tied together. That's the fundamental foundations of what we've been discussing. So I'm not inclined to back off of that. I think it's important that we look at what a teacher does. I am strongly in favor of after-school programs across the board and individual tutoring, and if we can make recommendations, and I appreciate Joy's concern of negotiations. I echo that concern, but I will tell you is I am not in favor of backing off in compensation. I think we can have an earnest discussion about benchmarks, but to back off of compensation, I would not support.
Thank you. Commissioner Hettleman.
Mr. Chair, I want to point out something I've addressed several times over the months. I think there's a difference between our task of recommending adequacy and the issue of affordability. Not that we don't live in the real world, but it seems to me our task is to determine what we think, what we know about what adequacy costs, and then the issue of phasing in is something that would be developed as we go along through the work groups. So in this particular instance, if I have it right, I mean, we should develop what it will cost for comparable teacher salaries, and if there is reasonable evidence, and I don't know what the research is, that a 12-month school year is going to benefit particularly high-risk kids, then we ought to recommend it.
Commissioner Showalter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make a quick comment. It's my understanding that with the original Thornton Commission, many people also thought it was unaffordable and dead in the water, but the money was found. So it shouldn't be something that deters us.
Senator Pinsky.
Procedurally, Mr. Chairman, I think the first fundamental question is the language we've developed, which I think is a accumulation of the last 12 months. Maybe we should have a straw vote of up or down whether we retain the language as it is, and if there are a majority that think we have to adjust it, then we look to amendments, or in the reverse way, take up an amendment. I would love to get to consensus, but this is a pretty fundamental question, I think, which I think we've all listened to. In terms of salary, again, I think the 12-month extending the school year is a separate question. We should take it as a separate question, but I think it's an important question. I just think if we can't get to consensus, we might have to take a vote.
Rachel?
So, I guess we have two things going on here. The first is the language that you have in front of you with no changes to it for number 2, which, as we started out, said, once the Commission's recommendations are fully implemented, the gap in compensation between teachers and high-status professions requiring comparable levels of education, should be significantly reduced, if not completely eliminated. A timeline for accomplishing this goal will be included in the Commission's final report. There was then a proposal to change that so that we would strike the intro phrase, and it would start with the gap in compensation between teachers and high status professions requiring comparable levels of education should be eliminated, period. And then a timeline for accomplishing this goal will be included in the Commission's final report. So that was one recommendation, and then that set off all of the further discussion. So, I mean, if we don't have consent, maybe we need to go back and either take the language as started out on this piece of paper and then go from there.
Oh, Commissioner Schaefer.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify. I'm not backing away from that point. In fact, I think I'm one of the few people that continues to make that point. The point about compensation has to come first. We are woefully behind in compensation, and that should be, if we're talking about priorities, that should be a priority, and it should come alongside any other thing that we identify as a priority. But if we're talking about adequacy, that is where we are inadequate. What I'm saying is the level of detail and specificity about the comparability between a 10-month employee, and I take your point, Senator Pinsky, that 10-month employee is working as a 12-month employee. I don't know that we need to get into that level of detail. That was and so I hope I didn't muddy the water with my comment, but that's what I was trying to say.
Let's see, are any other, yes, Senator Pinsky.
Yeah, but just procedural suggestions, see if we can get off the dime. Look, I would be happy to offer a compromise between the existing language and removing a sentence where we simply reversed it and said, shall be eliminated or overwhelmingly reduced if it got us to consensus, but I'm not sure it would. So,
substantially reduced or something like that, yeah. Commissioner Rice.
So let me also offer something that might get us to where we need to be. A lot of our conversation has been around relativity when it comes to the gap in compensation. But the gap in compensation itself is not implicitly defined. A gap in compensation could be a gap regarding 10-month to 12-month. It could also be 12-month to 12-month. There is no definition of the gap in compensation. And so since words do matter, I would say that the gap in compensation, the way it currently exists in the paragraph, gives flexibility to be able to draw down either one, and then would allow for us to then address that either legislatively, should it be something that's via legislation of the General Assembly in terms of some sort of floor or whatever the case may be, or if a work group wanted to tackle that definition, but having the wording here does not restrict either way of us interpreting what that is and can allow us to move forward unless we then want to get into what that gap in compensation is. So there is a way out for us with the current language the way it is to leave this up to another to decide what that definition might be. I just put that out there because the way I read it, it could be that way.
Okay, we're going to go down the row here. Commissioner Hettleman?
I thought that there really was a consensus around the language that Rachel had suggested, and my guess is, maybe I'm wrong, but I think there is that consensus already, and it's the other issues that are, hanging us up.
Commissioner Helfman?
Yes, I believe there was consensus around the recommendation that Rachel made today, not what's written here, but the elimination of the intro and significantly reduced.
Superintendent Guthrie?
So let me just ask for clarification. Is the compromise language keeping it all the same, but removing the benchmark occupations, nurses, certified public accountants, and architects? Is that language staying or going on the compromise? I would be in favor of this the way it stands, but eliminating, just putting a sentence after comparable levels of education. And my rationale would be is that we are trying to get students to choose an occupation where they would make comparable compensation to other professions. So I agree that I don't know. I know we suggested these, but I don't know why those three are the benchmarks that are in there. So eliminating them would be fine with me, but everything else holding.
Just to be somewhat clear here. So words do matter, and assumptions really matter when you are costing out something. So while we can, no offense by this line, wordsmith this to death, but in order to make actual costing out estimates, these decisions are going to have to be made. What professions are we comparing teachers to? Are we comparing 10-month salaries of teachers to 12-month salaries of other professions? Are we, over what time period are we trying to do this? I mean, all those things have got to be decided in order to cost this out, or at least assumptions made to lead to a cost estimate.
Well, then I would recommend nurses. Nurses, it is a comparable profession. I don't deny that, but so much of nurses' compensation is determined by what shift, the hours they work. I don't believe it's a comparable based on the hours. I think you would need to pick more occupations that work during the same time frame.
So that might be something that you want to leave to the work group.
Yes,
To
I
determine
think that's
based on
wonderful.
other
Yes.
additional data and information, what are the appropriate comparable professions?
I think we make that statement, we leave the comparable professions to the work group as a good way to go forward.
Okay. So is everyone...
In the last sentence, this is not our fundamental issue, but we could add in the last sentence a timeline for accomplishing this goal, and appropriate benchmark comparisons will be included in the Commission's final report. Does that speak to your issue? I mean, we're taking the comparable until we have time to do a more detailed analysis of what those professions should be.
That would be fine with me. I just don't want to lose the concept of increased comparable salaries. At the moment in the language, that's still there. Commissioner Schaefer, is your light on? No. Commissioner Wright.
Okay, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding what it seems as though we have consensus around and just read it. So basically for number 2, it would say the gap in compensation between teachers and high status professions requiring comparable levels of education should be eliminated. A timeline for accomplishing this goal, and then with you, Mr. Chair, what you just said added in, will be included in the Commission's final report. So that's where we are right now. I just want to make sure, and if so, I'm comfortable with that.
Commissioner Finn.
That's not my consensus. The original wording, as written, minus the specific comparable profession names, would be fine with me. No, we just went to the eliminated rather than significantly reduced, if not completely eliminated. That was what Commissioner Rice just said. So, no. I said what is underlined on page 3 minus the such as phrase would be tolerable as far as I'm concerned.
It would be once the commission recommendations are fully implemented, the gap, blah, 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 should be significantly reduced, if not completely eliminated, a timeline for accomplishing this goal, and the appropriate profession benchmarks will be included in the commission's final report.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what you're saying. So, yes, Delegate Washington.
Chairman, just to go back to what Senator Pinsky was saying, to bring some formality to it, I agree with totally what Mr. Rice said about it, and I would like to move that. I don't think we're moving anything, but I would like to move this and say that I support that, and I would like to move it for consideration. In support of Commissioner Rice's comments.
So, okay, Senator Pinsky.
And I don't want to look for problems if there aren't any. But the implication when it talks about teachers is teachers, as they're now employed, as 10-month employees. I know earlier Commissioner Finn was talking about 12 months. So as I vote on this, and we're talking about comparable, it's comparable in their existing posture. Just whether it's not stated, it's implied, and there may or may not be consensus on that, but I just wanted to be clear.
Okay, we are going to have to move to resolve this issue through a vote, but there are some lights on, so I'll let those 4 comment, and then we'll have to make a decision. Commissioner Helfman.
I'll pass and look forward to voting.
Commissioner Finn.
I'm just going to say I don't share Senator Pinsky's assumption, so that should also be on the record.
Thank you. Chancellor Caret, did you want to make a comment? Commissioner Showalter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a very quick comment regarding wordsmithing before we get to our exciting vote. For number 2A, where it says once a career ladder is fully developed and implemented, I noticed when Ms. Heiss was talking about this, she skipped over, she just said implemented. It seems to be implied. I'm wondering if we really need the fully developed aspect, if we need the words fully developed.
Let's come back to that after we settle this other issue. So,
yeah, okay, thank you.
Rachel, are you, with your careful note-taking, in a position to say what issue we are voting on? What is the language we are voting on?
Yes, Erica can read that.
All right.
We're voting on number 2, not ABC, just number 2.
So, number 2.
No, as about to be read.
As about to be read. The gap in compensation between teachers and high-status professions requiring comparable levels of education should be eliminated. As written, this assumes a 10-month contract for teachers, a timeline for accomplishing this goal, and appropriate profession benchmark comparisons will be included in the Commission's final report.
Okay, so that's the language on the table. Is that moved by someone? Okay, and seconded. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor of that language, say aye.
Oh, no, we're going to have to
raise their hands.
Or, well, let's do the no's with raised hands.
Okay. All in favor, raise your hand.
Okay. Schaefer, Brinkley, Caret, Dorsey, Guthrie, Helfman, Hettleman, Jones, Kaiser, White, McIntosh, Pinsky, Rice, Salmon, Showalter, Valentine, Washington, Williams.
Okay, well, we should record those.
And then all.
All opposed? All opposed? Commissioner Finn is the only one, I think, opposed. Okay? All right. Now, we're ready to move on.